I mean it. I just read about you. You are fascinating.
Oh, and you're very kind, sir.
Oh, your
Very
music
kind.
work, your music work is overwhelming. I got to tell you, I just are you in L.A. now, or what part of the country are you in,
I'm
sir?
in Canada, not too far from where you did your show. Just down the street in
Near the
Kingston.
CTV network?
Well, just down the street in Kingston, Ontario.
Oh
Isn't
my!
that fascinating?
I spent about 10 weeks a year in Canada. Is that your home base, Canada?
Right now, yes.
But but you and then the movies you're doing what is it? One's a documentary. I don't remember what it was about. But it was about a war or something. Am I thinking the wrong thing right now?
Oh, 21 Brothers.
Yeah.
And it was, see, you're interviewing me. It's
No,
hard to be on the other side of the
interesting.
mic, isn't it?
Are we starting now? Are we doing it? Are we on?
We've started. We can
Let's
start.
start.
Okay, let's start. Thank you, sir, for joining us tonight. For over 6 decades now, the world-renowned amazing Kreskin has been entertaining and wowing audiences, myself included, with his showman's flair, his comedic wit, and his mind-reading skills. Kreskin has 20 published books, folks. He had a television series and even, are you ready for this, his own board game. Isn't that amazing?
You believe a board game?
Kreskin was the major inspiration for the Hollywood feature film The Great Buck Howard. Kreskin has appeared on The Tonight Show no less, folks, than 61 times. Multiple appearances on David Letterman, and in 2009, Kreskin became the first guest to make 3 appearances on Late Night with Jimmy Fallon. Now, from 1970 to 1975, the show The Amazing World of Kreskin was broadcast throughout Canada on CTV, and a young boy from Montreal would tune in week after week and exclaim, "How does he do that?" And that young boy, folks, was me. So this is a thrill for me to actually speak with Mr. Kreskin after all these years. Okay, Kreskin, as you requested. This series, but you're always going to be a sir or a mister to me, my friend. The series was produced in Ottawa, which is just up the street a bit from Kingston, Ontario. It's capital of Canada, folks, Ontario, at the CJOH TV studios, and they are still there today and distributed in syndication in the United States. It's my great pleasure to welcome the amazing Kreskin to the show. Welcome, sir.
I want to, Mr. Holland, or should I say Brent? Because I
Brent,
feel like
please, please.
No, it means that Canada has been my second home. Many people in Canada almost feel that I am Canadian. I spent about 8 weeks a year touring Canada, but the series, after we did it we moved then to Toronto after we did it at the original studios, and then we did 2 years in England because it went worldwide. It was interesting to be in Japan, where when I saw my appearance being played, I thought, my God, I never talked like that. I couldn't understand what was being said and so forth. But yes, my career has been like an adventure. I gotta mention something.
Please.
We never talked about it when Carson was on. He was very bitter about it. And by the way, I did 88 shows with Carson. The official list is 61, but he never forgave NBC. And in those days, as you know, the value of video was not kept. And the first 2 years of all his shows were all erased complete. There's not a trace of any of those shows. And you know that's happened with a lot of shows. So as a result of this, and some of them, I wish I'd seen the first one I was on. But as a result of this, he, after that had an agreement, he put his shows in a sealed case underground in California. And that's one of the best uses for California I've ever heard to put, and forgive me. If we can't, I got to tell you something, Brent, with all that's going on today, if we can't laugh at ourselves, we're in damn trouble. You know what I mean?
Well, there's a lot to laugh at, too. I mean, who would have thought the election would have turned out the way it did?
Well, no, but listen, give us credit. Our election this time has been the finest sideshow since Barnum and Bailey. I could, by the way, I want to say this to all of you. I hope we can talk again, because immediately in reading about you, in just the first few minutes we talk, I just feel a tremendous rapport. I've been interviewed by thousands of people, but you are very special. And I have to tell you, what's been exciting about my life is that a performer, I don't have footlights between myself and the audience. So because I don't have equipment, I'm working with people who are thinking in the audience. And when the CTV show started, they came to me and said, I had a meeting with the head of the network near the end of the first year because something I did on the show went wrong. I walked in, and there was the head of the network who's a fan, 4 other people with him, lawyers. He said, Kreskin, would you consider repeating it and doing the show over again? I said, to keep the credibility of what I do, I want it to be seen live as is, and that's the way it stayed. The only editing was because of commercials, but we never edited anything. And I think in the 5.5 years, that must have seeped off to the audience because, Brent, today, if you watch a reality show and you think it's real, I want to invest with you in the Brooklyn Bridge. I'll sell it for a high price. You know what I mean?
I do. Okay, I have a question for you. Now, I thought, you've done 1,000 million interviews. You've been on this side of the microphone, that side of the microphone, this side of the camera, that side of the camera. So I thought, you've been asked every single question there is to be asked. So I thought, if you were interviewing yourself, how would you introduce yourself, and what would be your first question to yourself?
I got to tell you something, Brent. I've been interviewed all over the world. I've been interviewed in foreign languages 5.5 years. I toured Saudi Arabia, which they want me to write a book because it's stories that don't even seem like Arabian Night stories, what have you. But anyway, I've never been asked that question, and it fascinates me. What would I ask myself? And I think one of the questions that would be asked me, which I couldn't answer probably in 30 seconds or a minute, is, Mr. Kreskin, how could you conceive at 9 years old, and then when you were performing at 12, that you were going to communicate an ability you were enamored with, believe in, and yet make it acceptable to your audiences? Because, Brent, I had no teacher, and I had no system. I had to find my way, which made it an adventure. That's what made it an adventure. By the way, and I've done over 1,000 university shows in this country and Canada. I want to tell all of you students to understand something. We learn more from failures than we do successes. If I read 4 books a night, I don't brag about this, but Howard Stern's made a big issue. It takes me 12 minutes to read a novel and about a half hour to read a technical book. And I don't mean skim. I absorb. I just built an entire house attached to my library because it's over 9,000 books. But if you read the lives of successful people, and then you think, my God, I know why I'd hire them. They had these things standing in the way, blocking them, not working or what have you, including in movie making, and they rose above it. Those are the people I would like to work on a country and also building a system, a communications and what have you. So it's not an easy thing. You ask me a question which is almost impossible to answer with a question, but I think the other thing is this, and I don't know how to explain this, but there was a great anthropologist years ago who, when I was a kid, I used to see her with every issue on television. They'd bring her out. Her name was Dr. Margaret Mead. She was legendary. She lived in Africa with the Pygmies for a number of years. She used to bring students to my program. She says, Kreskin, we have psychology courses, and I forget what university she's teaching at. She says, but I bring 200 students to your show whenever you're in this area because I want them to see what reality is. It's not quite the way things are written in books. How can a person function? By the way, she didn't want me to call myself a mentalist. She wanted the term sensitive because you read all the books before the last century, and people with unusual abilities were called sensitive. But I said I'd have to spend 20 minutes to explain to the audience what a sensitive is before they thought I might be a terrorist. She had her sense of humor. I love that. I'm gonna quote you from now on. You don't mind if I steal some of your copy because
not at all, sir. Because I've stole your stuff over the years too. So it's only fair that it's reciprocated. You see.
I want to share with you something I've been holding back, more so to mention to you because.
Please, sir.
By the way, you mentioned the movie The Great Buck Howard, and folks, you can look at it. Although the love story in it is not me, my lady friend said, you didn't treat us like that. No, they had to make it a little bit spicy, but everything happened in the movie on stage. It was written by a road manager that knew Colin Hanks, Tom Hanks' son well. Every single thing happened there. But Tom Hanks comes to me the day it's opening, and they kept sending me scripts, and I said, go ahead with it. And he hugs me, and he says, thanks for making it possible for my son to play a road manager. He says, I got to tell you the good side and the bad side of making this movie. This is quiet, with the crowd out there and the bad side. Tom has a quality like Regis Philbin. He's the same off as he is on. So he said to me, John Malkovich watched days and days and hours of all your appearances early in your career, today, how you talk to people and so forth. He says, now I'll tell you the bad side. He says, Kreskin, you know that handshake of yours? Well, Regis calls it the dream of every chiropractor. I have, Brent, an extraordinarily energetic, which is not an affectation. All my life, that's what I've done. He says, listen to me, Kreskin. I said, yeah, Tom. He said, John Malkovich shook hands with 30 people a day, every day, for 3 or 4 days in a row. He said, we needed chiropractors because he wanted to get my mannerisms. So there's a good or a bad side to me as well.
Sir, I've got some quotes here from you, and I'd just like to get your take on this one. Using suggestion, I could never make someone do something he didn't want to do, but it's different in a crowd. Psychologists don't know why, but somehow the level of morality is lowered and responsibility is lost.
Critical thinking is as well, because as when we're in a crowd, early in the history of this country, when there were hangings in other parts of the world, you never had a situation where one person hanged a person they thought was guilty, or they were fighting, or whatever the thing was. It was always a group, and the people were able to walk away. If I have a dilemma which bothers me, and I'd like to hear the people who create laws to protect our culture explain this to me. I don't understand. There are riots, and people have a right to protest, and that's a part of here in the Western world. But when I see in riots, people breaking into stores and taking things that a man or a woman or a family has spent their life in building the store and stealing them, that's a mob response. If you and I by ourselves went in and do that, we'd be in prison tomorrow. There's something wrong there. And I think, by the way, if more people were immediately held responsible and said, you committed this crime, all this jazz, that maybe there would be a little bit of a level on how people respond in groups. But the other thing is, yes, we don't think as critically in a group, because think about this, comedies are funnier with a group of people. If you sit by yourself, you have a lot of time to think to yourself, and you don't have contagiousness influencing you. There's something about a patriotic song that's more inspiring when it's around people. Prayers are as well.
I agree completely, but I want to talk about another quote you use where I think a mob situation is used in nefarious terms, and this quote is very, very deep from Mr. Kreskin. Hitler used hypnotic techniques in speeches. The torchlight parades, the somber drum beating, being evidences this. Now, I was going to ask you.
By the way,
please.
Anyone who's guessing, one of the key figures behind Hitler was a man whose name was Hanussen. You don't hear about him in history. Hanussen is his name, folks. He was the most famous hypnotist in Europe. He performed everywhere. And when you see Hitler in person and his mannerisms, they were almost imitative of Hanussen. The famous photographer who did the movies on Hitler, she was legendary. She came to one of Hanussen's, she says, can I film you? I want it for a photogravure or Sunday supplement in the newspapers. It never appeared. He was furious. She was working for Hitler. They were studying his techniques and took all the film until Hitler decided that this man's personality could be so strong, it could be a danger. And Hanussen was murdered in April of 1933. So the story behind is things we don't all know about.
I think that's a pretty good example of how mass hypnosis, if you will, if that's right, what I would call it, can be used in nefarious terms.
Oh,
I was thinking, I also thought of the mass hypnosis, which may have taken place. It could have been a miracle in Fatima. The three little girls that received the message, and then there was 100,000 people that gathered later on in Fatima, and the little girl yelled out, "Look at the sun." And the sun did a kind of a miracle. It changed colors. It did all kinds of different things. And there was 100,000 people not even involved with the event from miles away, actually saw the sun.
See, that's the interesting thing.
Yeah.
They saw it miles away without necessarily hearing the details of what they were supposed to see. So in the back of my mind, I tend to believe that there was more than just pure suggestion, but it certainly heightened the response. So there's no question about it. We don't realize in this day, and let's give an example that has been discussed for years, and since I knew him well, I can relate to you, and that was Orson Welles' War of the World. Orson Welles did a radio show based on a very famous fiction story called The War of the Worlds, because Orson wasn't just Orson's personification and handling. He was a brilliant actor, what have you. The culture and society was ready. Just a year before, in Madison Square Garden, was a massive meeting of the Nazis. And we in America, I was a boy, but the Americans suddenly realized, my God, this is a tremendous power. And there was fear. And there were rumors that Hitler might invade the United States. There were rumors. I will show you someday from Mexico into Texas the exact pathway the Nazis proceeded to use, because it has not been completely done away and no one's ever talked about it. I go on, but that's not the point. Since many radio shows had bands during the day that interrupted and played, that you would be hearing a band and news would interrupt and as an alert. And that's what made it so incredibly. And my father in New Jersey was getting a haircut that night because he knew the barber, and the barber was able to talk to him personally. And it was late at night on Roseland Avenue, and they're cutting his hair. And the barber says, "George," we turned the chair around. There were trucks going by with mattresses on them. And he did not know that people in the town of Cole were escaping. So that's how powerful suggestion can be when the climate is right.
That's terrifying, that responsibility. How do you handle that responsibility?
Well, I am very, I feel a tremendous, I agree with you. I feel a tremendous personal responsibility. I don't want to talk about it because I've worked on 84 crime cases in my life. In the past 3 weeks, just I'm being called on a murder case, and that's aside from my work as a performer. But I realize the responsibility of one's abilities and one's gifts. And yes, I've been approached in the past by underworld situations, others. When I was 16 years old, I was offered by people to sit in and play cards for them. I had no knowledge in Eastern Pennsylvania until the police chief told me that they were key heads of the mafia. So people do want to take advantage, but we have a responsibility in life, and I morally, my family thought I was going to become a priest. What a mess of the church that would have been. Brent, we would have been in trouble. Going to confession, I would have told them when they were lying. No, the other thing is, I have rarely revealed this. I have a habit, which you've watched my series, no one ever knew except the crew who were sworn to confidence what this meant. No, I'm not borrowing from the famous actress, who pulled her ear and well, we won't go. You folks know, I'm going to tell you. But anyway.
Carol Burnett, folks. I hope I didn't.
Carol Burnett. Yeah. Well, I love her. We kid each other constantly. I never do this on the stage. But if I'm up on television, the crew knows if I ever do this, the person I'm working with the audience, be prepared to move the cameras away. The content of what they're alluding to is not for public consumption. And that's why I do this. I will never embarrass a person, although in one case, I stopped a show in Indianapolis. And the reason was that when the Bob Cates came back, I'd worked at this nightclub off and on for years. Something's wrong. I said, "Just get the lady back here. She plans to commit suicide and get a priest." Most suicides, even famous ones, they forget they've taken a drug and they take the next time too soon after the first. But this lady was planning. We got a priest. And I said, promise you'll see him every day for the next 10 days. 8 years later, here in New Jersey, I was performing for a fundraiser at a carpet company. They paid a lot of money for the show. It was Sunday morning. At the end of the show, when it was all over, someone rushed from the audience forward and threw her arms around me. She said, remember me. It was 8 years later. She would plan suicide, but most are crying out for help.
What a story. Have you ever scared yourself to the point that you don't want to do it anymore?
In 2001, I was on CNN. It was New Year's Day. And I'm on a lot of shows around that period. And I don't know, we were talking about something. And I suddenly interrupted and said, I don't know why. I just got this feeling that in September of this year, there's going to be a disaster happening in New York involving 2 airlines. Well, after 9/11, I spent a couple of days with the CIA. They said, what made you say this? And I don't know. Things like that happen, and they happen sometimes very spontaneously. And I remember, this sounds like a horror story. I had an office for 8 years with a psychologist when I was in my late teens. He saw me perform. He says, young man, I'll let you treat my patients. You have an ability to use suggestions. And for 8 years, I worked with him when I was not trying. I used to see 30 of his patients a week, one at a time, usually on Sunday because I wasn't working then. And one night, I was in my office, and only patients he referred to me. Because I'm like 22 at that point, I hear a rumble in his office. I open the door in this apartment where he has rented. I said, Harold, you okay? You don't interrupt a man who's practicing. This is a clinical psychologist with a PhD, one of the finest, Dr. Harold Hansen. Open the door. There this short man stood with blood pouring out of one eye, blood pouring out of his ear, and this thick oaken table, a crack down the middle, and his patient standing there. The patient had become psychotic, and with psychotic behavior, the strength could break something. And he told me, days later, he said, you tell this story whenever you want the rest of your life. I came up to the man. Now we're only 4 feet apart. I didn't know, how am I going to survive? Because he's obviously next going to break Dr. Hansen's neck. But Brent, 3 minutes later, we were on the floor, the gentleman and I. He was playing with the dog he had had years ago that I'd created a hallucination for, and it was calming him down, and that caused the relief of this trauma. You ask how I did it. I'm not being mystical because I know how I use my abilities. I don't know. It was an emergency. You don't have time to think of what's the right thing to do any more than you do in a battle. But somehow, as Hansen said, you found out what was tranquilizing in his life. And there he sat for the next 10 minutes playing with his dog.
Sir, we're going to have to start to wrap up now, but just a couple of quick questions.
Can we make this continue in the future sometime?
Absolutely. I'd love to.
See. I see is a powerful suggestion.
You see, and I sucked right into it right away. Okay.
You're right. I know I talk a lot, but you brought out some things in my life that are very deep, and I have very deep feelings about. And I hope I want you to realize I just consider my career blessed. I'm 81 years old.
Are you sure somebody's lying to you about being 81? You know that. Check your birth certificate. Your mom lied.
Do we have 2 minutes?
Sure, absolutely.
I had my eye treated for a problem, and 3 days later, I was almost totally blind, and within a week, I was completely blind. There was no thought that I may ever see again. An optometrist here in town saw me and said, you got to get to this doctor. It turns out the doctor had inadvertently severed the attachment of my eye. Had I waited 2 weeks, I would never have seen again. 6 days before Christmas, signs of light came back, and slowly the vision is coming, and I am celebrating. I am celebrating.
Fantastic news. That's fantastic news. Okay, sir. Predictions for this year. The worst prediction and the happiest prediction.
Well, I want to tell you something that I want to create and see happen, and I saved it for you. People in Hollywood have been calling me and saying, Kreskin, if you can make this happen, we hear you're going to say this. I'd like my prediction to come true. that we will have double features again, and I will tell you why. It costing so much money to go to a movie. All the movies have to be at least 2 hours or more. Not every story is meant to be 2 hours in length. I predict someone's going to give a shot at it and try double features again.
Is there a dumbing down that's going on right now, do you feel?
In what way do you, tell me.
Okay, everybody's on their cell phones. Nobody's talking to each other.
You just said something, Brent, so significant. Folks, listen to me when I say this, because my life is based at communication. When you go out with someone you love, you're interested in, you feel strongly about, for God's sakes, once in a while, put the cell phone on the floor in a shoe in a box and communicate with them totally, because sometimes when there isn't even any conversation, Brent, we are communicating. And we need to stop. The one thing we're losing in the Western world is when we stop and go by ourselves alone and reflect upon what we've experienced that day or that afternoon. We're not doing that anymore. And that's no magical thing. It's becoming lost. And that's one of the keys to life.
I think that's a perfect way to end it. And I usually ask every guest what they would say to the youth of today. But I think you've just said that. I think that's important for them to hear.
I want to say one thing to you, and I mean this sincerely.
Yes, sir.
This is one of the nicest experiences I've had in a long, long time, Brent. I mean that sincerely.
God bless you, sir, and thank you for everything you've done for everybody over the years.
Godspeed.
Godspeed, my friend. The amazing Kreskin, folks, right there. I'm Brent Holland from The Brent Holland Show. See you all next time. Thank you, sir.